to share with is just invite us to thinking about what he's saying about artificial intelligence, because pretty early on he's made it clear that that is going to be a major focus of his pontificate, at least for the present and the immediate future. And rather than give some sort of summary, which would be like AI, right? Tell me, what does Pope Leo think about? What I brought is what is to date probably his most definitive statement on the subject, somewhat deceptively titled An Address on the 60th Anniversary of World Communications Day. But he talks about artificial intelligence. And so rather than, well, the Pope said this, or Pope Leo said that, or what does Leo think, I'm just going to invite us to actually work through the document together. It's not long, and we can easily read it, but also just have some dialogue, have some questions, have some commentary, and to let Leo speak for himself, which I don't think we do often enough. I mean, academics do, but what has the man actually said in the text? And then when we hear X, Y, or Z make some generic comment, positively or negatively, we can address that, or we can at least know in our hearts, what has the man said? But I want to remind us that in one of the first statements he made after he was elected Pope, he was talking to a group of cardinals, and he laid out very explicitly why he chose the name Leo for himself. And this has been commented on many times, but, from the man's own mouth, I've got the quote here. So this was from May 10th, so very shortly after of last year. And so he says, I chose to take the name Leo XIV because Leo XIII, in his historic encyclical Rerum Novarum, addressed the social question in the context of the first great industrial revolution. In our own day, the Church offers to everyone the treasury of her social teaching in response to another industrial revolution and to developments in the field of artificial intelligence that pose new challenges for the defense of human dignity, justice, and labor. So that's about as explicit as it gets. He's saying, okay, Leo XIII at the dawn or after the dawn of the industrial age is dealing with questions of social justice around the workplace, industry, how employees are treated, and so forth. And Leo is making a rather bold, I think, fair, but a rather bold claim. He's saying, look, this is the equivalent of that. This is our new industrial age. Artificial intelligence is radically, reinventing how we understand the workplace, how we understand labor, how we understand laborers. And so the Catholic Church, not only is it right for it to pronounce on this, but it needs to, that there's an imperative that the Church addresses this and that the Pope addresses this. So right from the get-go, he's laid it out there. I think for people who work in these fields and so forth, they've been well aware for a long time the impact of artificial intelligence. But I think while, the word AI gets tossed around a lot in the popular parlance, everyone now is starting to awaken to just the full magnitude and impact that AI is having, and even realizing that the full impact can hardly be adequately measured right now in advance. So I'm encouraged, and I think it's a great thing that our Pope is speaking out so strongly on this and drawing attention to it. So that's the little lead-in. So I've got a copy, probably enough for everyone here. Here you go. The ghost of my German father guarantees we will stop by 7:45, so wherever we're at, we'll stop at 7:45. But, hardly do I intend this to be anything like a lecture, so we'll, have give and take and that sort of thing. But while the sheets are getting passed around, let me just open it for a few comments or things that are on your mind. As you think about artificial intelligence, specifically in regards to our faith, perhaps, just what do you think? Questions, do you see ethical problems there? Is it a source of concern or fear? Are you excited about it? Just what comes to your own mind? Oops. Yeah.
The teacher in me sees it as being a lovely reference, but the human being in me sees it replacing people in far too many ways.
Okay. So, does it have the capacity to replace people, what people do? Yeah.
I'm just sort of concerned where, when you run a query on AI, it's running the algorithm to an assortment of references. So if someone's asking a question, is it really going to go to the catechism or going to go to, the doctrine of the church? Or the,
so the sources that it's going to, yeah, that's right. And there are some companies that, will claim at least they will just draw from friendly sources, so to speak, to get their answers. But, how do you define friendly? And if you're going to make it really useful, it can't just be an index on one or two works. It's all right. It's very timely. Yeah, if anyone's phones ring or interrupt us, it's not an interruption here. It's entirely appropriate. Because again, for the person who says, oh, AI, that's not for me, I'm just old-fashioned, well, you've already lost. I mean, it's being used in all sorts of ways today. But just maybe a couple other comments, or people have, yeah.
I'm going through a medical journey, and I subscribe to the premium ChatGPT.
Okay.
And every twist and turn and question I put into chat, and what it gives me is good information that I can go verify, validate, ask my docs.
Yep.
And it's been 95 to 98%. Yep. And so I think it's a very good, powerful tool used for good intent.
Yeah.
And so I'm in ChatGPT every day, even with some mundane questions, but
Sure.
But this kind of thing, whatever, it's like, hey, put it into chat.
That's right. Absolutely. And so what I want to do tonight is, rather than just try to have some broad, generic, say a million things about AI, but what is it that Leo is saying? And so that's why I gave us all a copy of the text. And so I'm just going to invite us to really, stick to the text so that we get a sense of what he's saying. And then, of course, we can offer our own thoughts on it. But I think the main thing to take out of this, or one of the main things, is that he's, he draws a point essentially saying it's, to use the fancy language, it's anthropological more than technological. In other words, it's raising questions of what it means to be human. That's almost more foundational than just the technology itself, right? And that's why the title of this little gathering is, well, what does it mean to be human? As Leo is raising these questions of artificial intelligence. And so very significantly, this is not an encyclical, so it doesn't have all that full development. But the title, if you like, Preserving Human Voices and Faces, right? AI doesn't appear anywhere in the title there. It's entirely anthropological, right? Human. It's about human beings. Voices and faces. And that's his lead-in. And I think we should always keep track of that, because, if there's something here to be afraid of, well, we should ask, how is it perhaps threatening our humanity? Or is it misrepresenting our humanity? Or is it changing our humanity, right? Neurological development, as kids grow up in an AI world, that literally does have an impact. But, guess what? That's been around since TV. You've all been polluted, whether you like it or not. You're fine. So, our faces and voices are unique, okay? Hasn't said anything about technology yet. Distinctive features of every person. They reveal a person's own unrepeatable identity and are the defining elements of every encounter with others. So look at what he's saying there. Are you unique? And most people say, yes, I'm unique. Am I identifiable? Yeah, absolutely. I am who I am. I'm not my phone. I'm not what some AI device has said about me, I'm unique. Well, that's a nice claim, but why is it true? And Leo, at least, is telling us, we are unique because of our faces and our voices. Now, obviously, he means more than just, what you look like. What's the word, doppelganger, for that other person on the planet who looks just like you? It could be useful or frightening. So he means more than that, and then he goes into the etymology, right? And words matter. The ancients understood this well. To define the human person, the Greeks used the word face, prosopon. And as he says there, because it expresses etymologically what is before one's gaze. So the idea of the face is that which, you gaze upon. That's the Greek root. The Romans take that, Latinize it, and they come up with personare, person, which literally has to do with sound. The old, if you remember the sign for drama, the smile and the frown masks, if any high school musical former kids here, the sounding board, you'd wear these masks and your voice would be amplified off of that wooden mask. And that's ultimately where you get the word personare, right? Sonar, sound. So he's saying what is unique about the person is the face and the voice. And again, understanding that metaphorically, because each one of us is unique in who we are, how we project ourselves, how we represent ourselves, and ultimately who we are underneath. So that's what he wants to hold on to. So whatever else he's going to say about artificial intelligence, his foundational starting point and ending point is that there is this unique quality about the person. Now, an AI devotee, not all of them, but some would say, well, that's a nice claim, but you really just kind of said that. You just said that off the cuff. I mean, if I get to know you well enough, if we talk long enough, if I read every letter you've ever written, if I, read everything your relatives, going back to the dawn of printing or writing, have ever written, and you say, well, no one could ever do that. And your machine would say, I could do that in about a millisecond. If I could get a hold of the text, I read it all in, and if I can somehow speak with your voice to the degree at which, you make a comment or a question about the weather, and I can look back and see every comment you've ever made about the weather, are you the kind of person when it's kind of overcast says, oh, it's probably going to rain today? Or are you the kind of person who every time it's over, you say, oh, no, it's not raining, we'll be okay? I'm exaggerating here a little bit, but you get my point. If you could gather all of that information, one of the things we judge other people by is like, oh yeah, that's Bob, he's always thinking it's going to rain, he's such a pessimist. Well, you're basing that on your experience, you're basing that on what you've heard. You're not going into their synapses and, messing around with what's going on in their brain. So all that I'm saying is to play, computer's advocate. Some people would raise the question and just go, well, what does it really mean to say that your voice is unique or your... Now, of course, there's lots more you can talk about and, awareness and consciousness. But I'm simply saying, and the reason I'm glad Catholicism is wrestling with artificial intelligence is because I think, as with all science advances, it forces us to be more precise in the questions that we pose and the answers that we give. We should never be afraid, faith should never be afraid of science, but we know things about the world that Thomas Aquinas, couldn't have dreamt of. So knowing that, well, what is life? What is the nature of life? So, they force us to hone the theological language that we use. So Leo has put this out here, I wouldn't disagree with it, but I can imagine what some artificial intelligence advocates would say in response. Faces and voices are sacred, he goes on. God who created us in his image and likeness, obviously he's taking that from Scripture. He's taking that as a revealed truth, right? That's one thing that, religion brings us, is revelation. Nobody derived that we are in the image and likeness of God. That's not an algorithm. That's just a basic statement that's either true or it's not. But obviously, if we are taking Genesis as a revealed text, as we do, that's a given. Created us in his image and likeness and gave them to us when he called us to life through the word he addressed to us. So these faces, these voices, these unique qualities that we have are given to us when we're called to life. And then he plays off of this idea of the word, right? Scripture is so wonderful in that way. God speaks in Genesis. The prophets hear the word and they speak the word of God. And then John, the evangelist, picks right up on that. In the beginning was the word. So this word resounded down the centuries through the voices of the prophets and then became flesh in the fullness of time. And we too have heard and seen this word, in which God communicates his very self to us, because it has been made known to us in the voice and the face of Jesus, the Son of God. So in the incarnation, you have God's own face and voice represented to us. And Leo's using this as, an underpinning or a justification for why our own faces and voices are unique and cannot be reproduced. From the moment of creation, God wanted man and woman to be his interlocutors. He wanted this. Again, it's a statement. You can look at it being borne out in Scripture, in practice, experience of religion, but God has a desire that we would be the ones in communication with him. Then he cites Gregory of Nyssa. You can look that up. And jumping down a little bit, preserving human faces and voices, therefore, means preserving this mark. We are marked. Our face and our voice is a mark upon us. Some of us may like those marks more than others, but the mark we have is what we've got. This indelible reflection of God's love. Interesting. Your face and your voice is a reflection of God's love. Not he loves you, and so he's given you a face and a voice. Somehow that unique quality you have is a reflection of God's love for you. So what he's doing here is he's building up, right, this whole arsenal, if you like, of here's why we are unique. It's not just because of DNA. It's not just because of whatever unique cultural underpinnings have gone into making you. But there's a profound theological reality here. And he's saying more than just you're in the image and likeness of God. That's pretty powerful. I'll get a lot of mileage out of that. But he's saying even more. He's saying that your unique quality, in some sense, is a reflection of God's love. And I think we can relate to that a little bit. Think of your human relationships. Think of your human loves. To what degree is the identity of a person you love a product of your love for them? Now, you'd have to play with that one a little bit and think about it, but for those of you with children, are your kids, is their identity in some degree a reflection of your love for them over the course of their lives? I mean, it would make a lot of sense to me. And that's the beauty of faith-based language, right? You're always stretching the language, the words a little bit. But I love the fact that he doesn't simply say, we're in the image and likeness of God, now let's move on, right? He's playing with that idea. In what way? What does that look like? And so because of that, we are not a species composed of predefined biochemical formulas. Well, that's a strong claim, because there are plenty of people who would say, well, give me these formulas and this is the way they behave. We can't reproduce it yet. That's been a level of complexity we haven't succeeded. A lot of people have tried to recreate life. And so Leo's saying, look, you can put all that together, all the chemicals together, and maybe even at some point you'll get a spark of life, Lots of people have tried it. We haven't gotten there yet. But what it's still lacking, right, is the indelible reflection of God's love. Each of us possesses an irreplaceable and inimitable vocation. Okay, so now it's not just who we are, that we reflect the the mark of God's love, but we are called to something. We have a vocation that is irreplaceable and inimitable. That means no matter what you do, no matter how many other people do it, I don't care how big your union is, about to have the ordinations of the priesthood, well, everyone, unique. Every one of our vocations is truly unique. And that sounds nice, but do you believe it? And if you believe it, then how? In what way is your vocation truly unique and inimitable, unable to be imitated? Notice he hasn't mentioned an electron, a switch. There's nothing we've read yet that's even remotely, quote, technological, because he's laying a foundation, right? And I think it's so easy to get all wrapped up in the technical stuff, which is fascinating, but if Leo can ground us in anything, it's in this foundational piece. And all these things, notice, are really based on claims, right? Claims of revealed truth. And you've got to say either that's real for me, or I'm not going to be able to advance much in the dialogue. Yes?
Not to interrupt, but this
John.
includes everybody. And you know what I'm thinking of?
Yeah.
Our special kids, our kids with Downs.
Yeah.
Or our kids who are, delayed for whatever reason. Are people who are different because maybe they were born without arms. A girl in my neighborhood
Yeah.
when I was a kid. This is all about them too.
Yeah.
Because they have so much to teach us. Because this is a problem with the AI, and we're devaluing people who society doesn't look at and consider to
Yeah.
be contributors.
Okay.
So we have to remember, no, this is everybody.
Yeah. And that's the beauty of anthropology. It's like, as long as you're human, this refers to you, what you look like, where you were born. And so all these distinctions that we tend to draw that we know our social justice teaching can challenge us on, where we conveniently maybe want to make distinctions because we, inherently prefer one group over the other. When you're talking about anthropology, you're talking about what it means to be human, right? So this is not a statement that just applies to card-carrying Catholics or Christians or believers. This refers to what it means to be human. So thank you for that. And also, anyone else, just jump in if you have questions or statements. We'll get as far as we get, and that's fine. So then he goes on, after the biochemical formulas, each of us possesses an irreplaceable and inimitable vocation that originates from our own lived experience and becomes manifest through interaction with others. So where does this inimitable vocation come from, partly? It originates with our own lived experience. And, seemingly nobody else has lived the experiences you have. They grew up in your neighborhood, they're your identical twin, they still haven't had exactly the same experiences, and the AI, extremist might say, well, but all you're telling me is you've got this library of experiences that you've had. If I can accurately enough catalog those, here's where you were this day, this is what you ate, that's with the people around you. I mean, is it ridiculously huge? Sure, but it's not infinite. It is a finite data set. And, we're at a point now where we can handle just absurdly large amounts of data absurdly quickly. And so what you're telling me is this, unique lived experience. Well, that's a library of experiences, and I can catalog all of those. And it becomes manifest through interaction with others. So this unique vocation that I have, it grows out of my lived experience. Your experience has not been mine, but it's manifested through our interactions, okay?
It
Yeah.
may be able to be cataloged, but I'm sorry, it can never be recreated how it impacted us directly and how we responded to it.
Okay, so say more about that. In other words, like, why can't it? I'm not disagreeing with you at all.
Because we have a soul,
Okay?
and you can't give a machine a soul.
Okay. So there you go. I mean, if we have a soul, and we all believe we do, but you can see where for the AI, let's say you have an AI atheist or something, then they could ask a fair question and say, all right, well, so you have a soul, then in what way do these things impact the soul? And you could get into that conversation and so forth. So all that I'm saying is this then helps us be more precise in how we talk about these things.
You can try and predict how you might respond, but in any given moment, you can change how you would respond because you're self-aware and you have control over that.
Okay? And so, Leo, that would be very much in line with what he's getting at here, that manifesting through our interaction with others, which would get into things like choices that you make or what have you. And so he's just being very clear about that. It comes from our lived experiences, and you know it through interactions, which presumably would be things like exercise, exercise of free will, but also exercise of just instinctual results, drawing your hand back from a hot flame or something. So after all of that, and there's a lot of, obviously loaded in there in our Christian anthropology as well, this challenge is not technological, but anthropological, right? So if there's challenges that are coming through artificial intelligence, they're not primarily technological ones, but they're anthropological. Are they questioning what it means to be human? Are they making false claims like, if you just give me the data set, I can tell you what you're going to do in response. Safeguarding faces and voices ultimately means safeguarding ourselves. Our faces, our voices, if we protect these, it literally is serious as protecting ourselves. Embracing opportunities offered by technology and artificial intelligence with courage, determination, and discernment does not mean turning a blind eye to critical issues, complexities, and risks. So the last thing he wants to convey here is, oh my gosh, this is the boogeyman, stay away from artificial intelligence. Catholicism, I think, Christianity, just basic human intelligence, doesn't have to be afraid of information ideas. The question is, how do we use it? And so he's just laying out there very clearly, again, embracing the opportunities offered by technology and AI with courage, right? Sometimes you're going to have to make difficult decisions, unpopular decisions, economically imprudent decisions, perhaps, at times. So courage, determination, to say we're going to move through, even if it's difficult, even if it seems very unpopular, even if there's sacrifice involved, and almost certainly there would be. And discernment, right? Just what we're doing now, talking about things. How do you make the decision? Just because we can do it, does that mean we should do it? Okay, so embracing all this stuff with courage, determination, and discernment does not mean turning a blind eye to critical issues, complexities, and risks. So we're going to want to engage them. Now he launches into, you might say, AI proper. And the first thing he says, he divides it into basically 3 chunks. So just to give a broad overview, because there's no way we'll get through everything, at the bottom of the first page, right? Do not renounce your ability to think. And then he starts talking about, well, what does it mean to think as a human being, and what maybe postures as thinking with some understandings of AI. Then the middle of that second page, to be or to pretend to be. So now he's getting into simulating relationships in reality, right? And some people would claim, well, you couldn't tell the difference between yourself and a sophisticated enough AI machine, things like that. And then at the top of the third page, you see the italics, a possible alliance, where he gets into saying, all right, how do we move forward? He's addressed some of the concerns, some of the fears. Is there a path forward that he's going to be laying out? Now, we're just 1 year into his pontificate. As probably many of you have heard, and the Cardinal assured me just the other day, his first encyclical, not his first encyclical, but the one he released was kind of finishing Francis's, but his first own encyclical is going to be on artificial intelligence, and it's presumably due out any day. Patty, you're always so far ahead of the curve from me, so do you know when it's coming out?
No, but
Okay.
we assume the 15th of the Reverend Navarro.
Okay, so that would be good timing.
The title leaked.
Oh, what is it?
Yes, Magnificent Humanity.
Okay, there you go.
Who knows if it's AI produced?
Okay. Exactly. What would the Italian be for that?
Well, in Latin it's called Magnificat Humanitas.
Yeah, okay. So, you heard it here. No, that's great. And so, I mean, how wonderful, right? That's, our Pope is coming right into that. Because it's always the case, I think, what the church can do is they're not going to be an artificial intelligence powerhouse. They will bring the dialogue. They will raise up the ethical conversations, just like you have what he's getting at here. So, do not renounce your ability to think. There's long been abundant evidence that algorithms designed to maximize engagement on social media, which is profitable for platforms, reward quick emotions and penalize more time-consuming human responses, such as the effort required to understand and reflect. So we all know what this looks like. All you have to do is look up one thing on the internet, and then all of a sudden every Amazon ad you get will reflect the thing you looked up on, right? So that's why it can often be embarrassing sometimes when someone goes to the Amazon after you've been on the machine. It's like, oh, are you that obsessed with sports, or whatever it might be. But it's all they're doing is basing it off of pattern. And really smart people and really smart algorithms. I mean, I'm amazed. I'll give them credit, how far we've come with that. Because I'll be honest, usually they're right. Usually I do find myself more likely to look at whatever ad they've spit up as opposed to some random thing. I've made purchases that way. But obviously, you can see where that can lead into the dark side. And what he says, right, designed to maximize engagement on social media, reward quick emotions, and penalize more time-consuming human responses. Quick emotions, right? Dopamine hits. You can actually, neurological studies show this. Click, click, click. Why? Think of other things that we enjoy. I don't know, eating ice cream or something. Well, you don't just eat, 20 gallons of ice cream at once, because one is, eventually there's this turn-off mechanism. But you can just click and click and click and click and keep going. Because dopamine actually doesn't saturate. I mean, you just keep getting more and more. But then I like this other thing, penalize time-consuming human responses, such as the effort required to understand and reflect, And I know myself, I'll throw in the towel pretty darn quick if it just seems like, oh, this is just taking too much work. It's got to be an easier way to do it. Probably for most of us in this room, I mean, we are at a very fascinating age, I find. I'm much older than all of you, so. Because we know in our youth what the world of maps and encyclopedias and telephone books, and yet we're all very comfortable with this stuff today. I'm sure sociologists have a word for this, but there's certain generations that just kind of bridge. I think of someone born in 1870, could easily have died after World War II. And think about what was bridged in that lifetime in terms of, whereas if you were born in 1500 and you died in 1550, it's not quite the same thing. So this idea of, and so I deal with seminarians, and most of them are under 25, and how quickly people can get frustrated over something that doesn't give a quick response. But even those of us who maybe are used to it, if my GPS gave out and I had to sit down with a map, I'd probably work harder to get a new GPS than to spend the extra 5 minutes to read the map, right? Because I still remember my dad's atlas. What's that?
As long as you don't stop to ask directions.
Yeah, that's right. No, you really lost it. I remember my dad's atlas, all folded up. That was his pride and joy. Okay, But notice how this is affecting real decisions that we make, right, about more serious things than getting directions. If you're not getting a quick solution. By grouping people into bubbles of easy consensus and easy outrage, what a chillingly brilliant phrase. Bubbles of easy consensus, yeah, we all think alike, we all shop the same way, we all look at the same kinds of sites, and easy outrage. You hate the people I hate. You get riled up by the statements I get riled up by. And so the algorithm will make sure I just see more and more comments like the ones that, push my button. And, we see what that looks like today, how quickly that gets going. These algorithms reduce our ability to listen and think critically and increase social polarization, right? So they don't have to act in this way, but they have the capacity, and we know people certainly use them in that way. But it's the usage of a possibility that we need to be aware of. Just in the interest of time, jump down to skip a paragraph there. Although AI can provide support and assistance in managing tasks related to communication, in the long run, choosing to evade the effort of thinking for ourselves and settling for artificial statistical compilations threatens to diminish our cognitive, emotional, and communication skills, particularly in the development with children, and a lot of studies are done in this regard. And in other talks that Leo has given, he's specifically highlighted that point about children and speaking to parents. And that, really goes back even long before AI really took off. Let's jump down to the second major chunk there, to be or to pretend to be. So it's a riff on Hamlet, simulating relationships and reality. So if you go to the second paragraph, technology that exploits our need for relationships can lead not only to painful consequences in the lives of individuals, but also to damage in the social, cultural, and political fabric of society. Again, easy to just fly through these things, but if we pick them apart, the social, the cultural, and the political fabric, each one of those is a unique domain, heavily interrelated, but you can just think about for yourself. Think about America today, the social fabric of society. Not just some abstraction, but your social fabric. This is a social fabric. The people you interact with, the people you directly, the culture. There's a culture represented here, there's cultures represented not so far from here, there's national culture, but that culture gets shaped by these things in a way that, hadn't happened nearly so quickly or probably homogeneously, but I'm not a sociologist, so be a fascinating book, AI's Impact on Cultural Development. And political, oh my goodness, we see how quickly that happens, no matter what side of the spectrum you're on. We used to say what side of the aisle, but now it's almost laughable to think it's that simple. We're a long way from Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan getting a beer together. Okay, this occurs when we substitute relationships with others for AI systems that catalog our thoughts, creating a world of mirrors around us where everything is made in our image and likeness. Not in God's image and likeness, but in our image and likeness. So it's this substitution of relationships, right? You're probably aware that the use of AI for romance is a growing thing, where you've got these sites and they'll tell you exactly what you want to hear, and you can probably plug in all your preferences. And if it says, well, that's just, that's creepy, that's weird. Well, then there's other people, figuring out ways to combine it with, all kinds of crazy stuff. But that is often because, again, the addictive drive there is going to drive the economics of it. Weapons and sex often drive economies. That's not an exaggeration. The defense industry and the one branch of the entertainment industry. Another major challenge, next paragraph, posed by these emergency systems is that of bias. which leads to acquiring and transmitting an altered perception of reality, right? Bias is huge. That whole thing of the algorithm feeding you something, that's going to begin to shape the filter that you use. Last thing we'll do before break, and then people can have questions or whatever, is look on the next page in the section he calls a possible alliance. And the second paragraph, I would say, is almost the summary of the whole document. The task laid before us is not to stop digital innovation, but rather to guide it and to be aware of its ambivalent nature. You don't have to stop it. You're not going to stop it. I don't care how hard you try. You can come up with every government restriction imaginable, and you're not going to stop it. But rather to guide it and to be aware of its ambivalent nature. This is the role the Pope can play. This is the role we can play in our families, in our communities, in our parish. It is up to each of us to raise our voice in defense of human persons so that we can truly assimilate these tools as allies, right? The worst thing we can do is just put our head in the sand and pretend it's not there. And so then he gives these three things. This alliance is possible, but needs to be based on three pillars. So he's giving us a foundation. I'm sure his encyclical is going to be all about these three pillars: responsibility, cooperation, and education, right? If you're going to use this stuff, to do it responsibly, that everyone has to cooperate. When he talks about cooperation, he says, the media people need to cooperate with the tech people, need to cooperate with politicians, need to cooperate with educators. Now, that's a tall order, but that doesn't mean it's not a goal to aspire towards. And if you're a Catholic politician or tech producer, or, at what point do we look ourselves in the mirror and say, if I really believe my faith and this is my life's vocation, am I letting this call to responsibility actually guide me? And if I'm not, then, what's up with that? And then education, that we just need to, and I think that's always the case, right, for Catholics, that we stay aware. No, we're not going to become, most of us, AI specialists, but to at least know, basically, what are the questions at hand. And the fact that our Pope is in the vanguard on this should be an encouragement to all of us. So, yeah, I don't know if people have comments or things they want to share.
When I think about this, we've had technology disruptors for the last 80 years.
Yeah.